This is going to be a short episode, just myself, Dom, here tonight. It's going to be a short episode, but I think it's going to be an important one. The purpose of this episode is to drop a little bit of knowledge on the factions of the Mandalorians, especially as we keep going forward with season 3 of The Mandalorian. I think you guys will really benefit from some of this information and some of this backstory, some of this background info as we keep going on with season 3, especially for those of you who don't really have the time maybe to go back and watch some of Clone Wars and Rebels. So I guess, yeah, spoiler warning. There will be some spoilers from Clone Wars and Rebels in this. And yeah, I think it'll be really good. But like I said, for those of you who don't have the time, but if you can make the time, definitely go back and watch some of the Clone Wars and Rebels because you won't regret it. All right, well, let's get into it. Okay, and so this really has to do with Bo-Katan and of course Din Djarin, the Mandalorian. That's kind of the purpose because I think some of the stuff that's going on, um, many of us know, and also many of us might not really understand. Um, and as you'll probably notice, the majority of this episode here tonight, it's going to be a lot of facts. And then as we go towards the end of our episode, it's going to be more speculations because we don't have all the answers just yet in Star Wars canon about these factions. But I'm going to give you guys a little bit better understanding of the history of the Mandalorian factions and then what's going on right now in season 3. Okay, I want to start out with these guys. This is Death Watch. We're introduced to them in Clone Wars. Now, Death Watch was a very extreme kind of terrorist-like organization. Basically, um, they broke off from the majority of the Mandalorians. Kind of had, and they had their own faction, uh, to which they're a lot more extreme, a lot more. Um, Violent, you could say, and they also wanted to hold on to more of the traditional ways of the Mandalorian as far as being warriors. They also, um, kind of took a lot of pride in themselves, and they were elitists, you could say, for sure. Now, this group was ran by Pre Vizsla, who is a descendant of Tar Vizsla. I've talked about him a couple times before, but Tar Vizsla was the very first Mandalorian and Jedi who built the dark saber. So Pre Vizsla, we spend some time with him in the Clone Wars. He's the leader of Death Watch, and this is really important because um, Bo-Katan, as we know, she's the heiress to the throne. Bo-Katan was basically Pre Vizsla's right hand woman, you could say. She was his right hand and a part of this Death Watch organization. So, very strong group of Mandalorians, uh, and yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about them a little bit later. We'll talk a little bit more about them. All right. So next, we need to talk about Darth Maul, how he comes into play with Clone Wars. Obviously, he's brought back to life. Now, those arcs are just really crucial and just so amazing. Like the rewatchability is very high for those arcs. You can definitely go back rewatch them many times because they're just done really well and really important for our story and for our story in the Mandalorian. You're just the payoff is going to be so much higher. You're going to enjoy the Mandalorian show so much more if you know these things. And I'm obviously going to, talk about a lot of these things that you may not have heard before. But if you can go and watch them too, it's still going to be beneficial, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot of fun watching it. All right, so Darth Maul comes back to life. I'm going to keep it, kind of brief and concise for this entire episode. He comes back, and he has an involvement with the Mandalorians as well. So, like we mentioned, Pre Vizsla is the leader, Bo-Katan his right hand, and Darth Maul and the Death Watch decide to do business with each other. It's not long after this that Darth Maul creates, kind of his own group of Mandalorian because he now takes over. and this group is called the Shadow Collective. It's not really talked their name. I don't know if their name is dropped a whole lot in Clone Wars, but later on, there's comics and books where the name is dropped. So the Shadow Collective, which, as I mentioned, they stem from the Death Watch faction. Now, Free Vizsla, Bo-Katan, they're doing business with Maul in order to take back Mandalore. They quickly realize that, Maul has kind of his own agenda, and they regret, doing work with him. They regret, you know, uh, building this relationship, especially Bo-Katan. She kind of tries to warn Pre Vizsla. Anyways, what it boils down to is Pre Vizsla and Darth Maul have a traditional duel, and they battle for the saber. They're ultimately battling to rule Mandalore. Darth Maul ends up killing Pre Vizsla and taking the dark saber. Now, this is where things get really interesting. This is where things get really important for us, um, as respects to the Mandalorian season 3. Now, after Darth Maul kills Pre Vizsla, of course, Bo-Katan had ties to the Death Watch. She was a part of Death Watch, and she was basically, working for Maul up until this point. We should also mention that Darth Maul um, also kills Satine, who is Bo-Katan's sister. So all these things are stacking up, um, and of course, Darth Maul taking the throne leaves the rest of Death Watch, the rest of the Mandalorians that are kind of involved here. They all bow down to Darth Maul, and they pledge their allegiance to him as their ruler of Mandalore, which obviously, Bo-Katan is not going for, um, and she, is the rightful heiress soon after this. But she's within this family and the original clan that has the right to the throne, basically. But it's not so much that it's more that she's kind of appalled that the rest of her Mandalorian friends and family, I guess you could say, have chosen to pledge their allegiance to Maul, who is not a Mandalorian by any means, and kind of go along with his corruption. So it's at this point that Bo-Katan breaks away. Again, this is really important. Bo-Katan leaves Death Watch. Okay, she's no longer a part of the Death Watch faction. She's no longer a part of, or she was never a part of the Shadow Collective. Um, so she's not a part of Death Watch, not a part of the Shadow Collective, Rand Mall, but she goes off with a few of her companions, and she starts her own faction known as the Night Owls. The Night Owls are who we see her with in Mandalorian season 2, when she's first introduced in episode 4, which is called The Heiress. It was actually either episode 3 or 4, entitled The Heiress. That's when we first see her in season 2. All right, so that's Bo-Katan, um, and the Night Owls. Now, why am I bringing up a lot of these things? Well, I'm trying to get to our main point, because there's been some confusion with a lot of these factions. There's so many factions, and we're only going to talk about uh, a couple of these right here, right now. Um, but I thought it was really important to make some clear distinctions between these factions, because we were talking about it on our season 3 episode 1 review. Go check that out if you haven't already. But we kind of got into a little bit of this conversation, and doing more research and rewatching some of the episodes. I just thought it was really important to talk about some of these things. And like I said, I think it'll be beneficial. And I think the biggest confusion is here is, you know, is Death Watch the Children of the Watch, which is, you know, Din Djarin's faction? And I think the short answer is no, but that's kind of where I'm headed right here with our little breakdown. Um, we go back to season, what is it? Well, it's one of our earlier episodes, either season 1 or season 2, but I believe it's season 1. And we get this flashback scene. Yeah, it should be season 1. Get this flashback scene of young Din Djarin being rescued by a group of Mandalorians. Obviously, he's known as a foundling. Now, what's really interesting here, right, is the emblem on this Mandalorian's shoulder. If you notice, we'll go back here to Death Watch. We see the emblem on his on Pre Vizsla's helmet. It's the same emblem as this Mandalorian right here. So this Mandalorian was a part of Death Watch, or at least he was at one time. Now, I think this is kind of where we go from the facts into some speculation. Um, I think basically what I've come to understand is that these three factions, Death Watch, ran by Pre Vizsla, the Shadow Collective, ran by Darth Maul, and then the Children of the Watch, who is ran by the Armor, and notable um, members would be Din Djarin, of course. Now, these three factions are all different, but they are related to each other in their origins. And I mean, you could kind of say that about all the different factions because, again, there's so many. We're not going to go into any more this time, but they're all separate, but they're also kind of related in a way. And so, um, I know personally, I was kind of confused. Well, are the Children of the Watch Death Watch? And and again, I think the short answer is no, but they are they are related, or they were at one point. And so, to backtrack just a little bit, after Death Watch was taken over by Darth Maul and basically turned into the Shadow Collective, um, Death Watch ceased to exist, and really they were kind of done away with as well. Once one of the original members, Bo-Katan, left and broke away from Darth Maul and the other Mandalorians that stayed in allegiance to him. Of course, that was all done away with. Um, we won't get into that, but that was all resolved in the purge, and of course, Ahsoka comes into play to save the day as well. Um, so yeah, so all these different factions, they differ for sure. Um, and so getting back to this image again, where we see Din Djarin being rescued by um, someone who has the Death Watch um, emblem. Of course, this took place around the time of Revenge of the Sith, or shortly after Revenge of the Sith. But even though he has that emblem, I think it's safe to say that Death Watch was done away with, and of course, they still kept the armor, but at one point that was part of Death Watch. Now, what I think is reasonable to conclude is that the Children of the Watch, although they are not as extreme and don't share as like um, maybe all the same views, because all these different factions have their different views of walking the way of the Mandalore, right? Now, it's really noteworthy too, because I think the big distinction that we see is this group of Mandalorian, the Children of the Watch. They don't take off their helmets, right? Well, that was never a thing. If you've seen Clone Wars and Rebels, that was never a rule with any of the Mandalorians that we saw in Clone Wars. All the different factions that we saw in Clone Wars and Rebels, all of them took off their helmets, and so and including Death Watch. So again, the Children of the Watch and Death Watch are not the same, but I think likely um, the Children of the Watch, some of them may have kind of come from Death Watch, or split off into their own faction. Again, they're all kind of connected and related in ways, but definitely they are their own faction, and have adopted their own views. Um, ideology and certain beliefs. Um, uh, because the biggest thing is not being able to remove your helmet and not showing your face to any living being. So that is kind of a little background history on these factions. I hope that you guys enjoyed this, and I think it will make a big difference as we go forward. And I think there can be a lot of speculation going forward for what this means for season three. Obviously, Din Djarin is um, a part of the Children of the Watch. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see, you know, what he decides to do. Is he going to stay a part of that faction? Is he going to break away like Bo-Katan did um, from Death Watch and, kind of start his own faction, something of that nature? It's going to be really interesting, but I wanted to make this little episode, give a little background info, um, and I wanted to keep it kind of brief and concise because obviously I'm always talking about it. But if you can go back and watch, these really incredible episodes, these like 2 to 3 episode story arcs, um, there's, like, specific ones, but, like, one of the big ones is in Clone Wars, and, I talked a little bit about it, today, but, having to do with, Darth Maul and Death Watch. It's really, really awesome, and, yeah, it makes watching The Mandalorian, so much more enjoyable. It really does. But alright, guys, I think that's pretty much it. If you don't mind, show a little class. Leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of this episode. And if you have any questions or any theories, drop them in the comments below. I want to hear about them. Also, let me know. Hopefully this kind of made sense. I know it's kind of in a way it's a lot to unpack, but I wanted to keep it kind of brief and not get into too much detail, too much depth right away. But I'm sure we can talk about it more later. Maybe I'll even do another episode, maybe like a part two or something on this. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching, and we will catch you in the next one. We're going to be doing our season three, episode two review of The Mandalorian here in just another day or so. So, yeah, Wednesday night, 6 p.m. live. Hopefully, we'll